In case you missed it, here's a Sports Animal Rewind.
Let's bring in the recruiting coordinator at ESPN for Recruiting Nation, also college football analyst, joining us here on the new Sentinel Sports page. Craig Haubert joins us here on the show. Hey, Craig, Vince, and Jesse, great to talk to you. How you doing, Craig?
I am doing great, gentlemen. How are you?
We're good. So you heard from Jared and Brad their breakdown of Jalen Hurd. Is that is that your opinion of Jalen Hurd overall? Give us your thoughts on him.
Yeah, those two, they do a great job, but they didn't unearth anything unexpected with what they saw. I mean, he's a big back. He's one of those guys. He's a physically imposing back, but he's not one of those 3 yards and a cloud of dust between the tackle guys. Really, he's got outstanding speed. He really accelerates quickly, and when he finds a seam, he can create big plays. But he's got that size, as they mentioned, to be able to kind of break some tackles and to be able to be a high carry type back. So his size is a little bit deceptive, and he gives you more. I think if you kind of go back to last year's class, there was a player out of Chicago, Ty Isaac, who signed with USC, kind of a big back like that. But I think Ty was a little bit more straight line. I think Jalen brings a little bit more shiftiness to him, and so yeah, he's a heck of a pickup. And not only as a running back, he's just a good athlete. I mean, he's one of those guys. If I know they got some other players in his class, another running back out of Georgia who I like very much. You know, he's one of those guys you could put at H-back, you could put on defense. I mean, obviously the plan is to play him at running back, but I think trying to accentuate his athleticism. I mean, he's a guy you can do a lot of different things with.
Are you surprised that he's not a consensus 5-star recruit across all recruiting surfaces?
No, not necessarily. And I think, you know, when you look from recruiting service to recruiting service, I think you kind of looking sometimes at apples and oranges. Everybody's got their ways of doing things. We, speaking from our behalf, you know, we're very, very leery to give out too many 5-stars. I think when you tag a player with a 5-star, you're saying that guy has the ability in today's college football world to come in and be an impact guy from the get-go, especially in a college football world where, you know, people expect more from freshmen. There's a very good chance these days they may only be there 3 years, especially if they reach the potential that they show. And so at this point, you know, we only have 11 5-stars, and I think we put a lot more of a premium as well on players who, on your defensive ends that can make an impact as pass rushers, your offensive tackles, obviously your quarterbacks and your cornerbacks, guys that necessarily, to use that term, don't grow on trees, a little bit harder to find, a little bit more premier positions, and I think if you looked at that, it kind of mirrors the NFL draft as well as who you see go at the top. Running back's not necessarily in that category, but I think you look at a guy like Jalen Hurd, we definitely have our eye on him. He could be a guy who can move up like Derrick Henry last year out of Florida, who signed with Alabama, and another big running back who was very versatile. And, you know, by the time it was all said and done and we put all the pieces together, he wound up a 5-star, and I think Jalen could possibly be in that mix as well as the process unfolds. But at this time, you know, we don't have him as a 5-star, but it doesn't mean he's not an outstanding prospect.
We're joined by Craig Haubert, who's the recruiting coordinator, college football analyst for ESPN, joining us here on the new Sentinel Sports page. Craig, you referenced last year's class. I want to go back and get your opinion on some of the guys that Butch Jones and this staff had a chance to piece together in their final month, 40 days, whatever it was, before National Signing Day. You had some marquee players in there, Marquez North, Joshua Dobbs, the quarterback, Jason Carr, Riley Ferguson, the quarterback, Jalen Reeves-Maben, a number of really quality players in that group. Just give me your overall thoughts on that 2013 class and maybe some of the guys that you really like that are going to be on this football team in the fall.
Well, you mentioned, I think Joshua Dobbs is huge. Obviously, we just talked about premier positions and quarterbacks, and he was a long-time Arizona State commit, and he's a dual threat guy, but he's got the ability to be an excellent quarterback from the pocket and then give you that little bit of an added dimension with his athleticism. And you think about some back of what Butch Jones did at Cincinnati, and he can be very much the player that fits in that system, and more so than even what he had with the Bearcats. I think he was a huge late pickup for them. I think really kind of Marquez North is the guy. If you look at their class, he's at the top, but I think that he could really be the one that we look back and say that was maybe, you know, the first kind of signature move of the Butch Jones era for Tennessee, was being able to kind of get him at late in the process and to get him to flip him over. And there's some other guys too. I think, you know, sometimes when you're building a program, you need to kind of get some guys that may be a little bit under the radar, but are just good football players. They're going to go out in the field. They're going to find a way to get the job done. They're going to be tough. They're going to be dependable. And I think a guy like Jalen Miller out of South Carolina, Gaffney, South Carolina, he's a little undersized. He's kind of a tweener type between a D-end, D-tackle, but he's got an outstanding first step. He's one of those guys who brings it every play, and I think those are one of those guys who, when you look at a recruiting class, you got to look at more than just the top, because those are only so many roster spots. You got to be able to fill out your roster. You got to be able to depend on more than just 3 or 4 guys if you're going to win it, especially in the SEC. So you got to have some good meat in the center of your class too. And I think he got some of those type players, as you mentioned, with Mabin, and I think a guy like Jalen Miller is a very nice pickup that maybe doesn't get a lot of headlines.
You got the opening coming up, and it's such a prominent event nationally as far as recruits are concerned. I think Dylan Bates is supposed to make his announcement at the opening. What could that do for Tennessee football specifically if he goes up there in front of all those recruits and that type of hype around that event and proclaims Tennessee as the school that he's going to commit to and ultimately sign with? What can that do for Butch Jones, for the Tennessee brand, and continuing to build it and restore that program?
Yeah, it's always about getting your program's name out there, and obviously it could be huge because you talked about the platform in which it's done. And I think that one thing, as soon as Butch Jones came in and took the job, was trying to elevate the perception of Tennessee, get it back up there towards the top. Because when you're not only just talking about the landscape of college football, but particularly the SEC, where it's produced the last 6 national championships: Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, all these programs being talked about as top 10 type programs. It's hard. It's hard to grab headlines. So I think any time along the course where you can kind of get your program in the news with a positive buzz, that is certainly going to help. You know, and talked about Butch Jones getting in there, doing the Twitter thing, being very hands-on, and then you get a player like a Dylan Bates who is a familiar name to recruiting fans and even football fans once they know who his father is, the old Cowboy safety who obviously played there at Tennessee. Now you got some people taking interest. Oh, look at what Tennessee's doing. What are they doing on a recruiting show? So maybe even people who are a little bit on the fringe of recruiting or not necessarily following SEC recruiting now starting to get an understanding of what's going on at Tennessee, because there's things like that where they're gaining some publicity on a positive nature with a player like that, or any player who might announce that fans are aware of on a public setting.
Craig, how would you describe or summarize the job Butch Jones has done so far in recruiting at Tennessee?
Well, you know, so far, very well. I mean, the point of that statement being so far is still a long way to go. Obviously, he's come in, though, when he's really hit the ground running. You know, I kind of, like I told you, I was very impressed with the pickup of Dobbs. And you look at what they're doing right now in the ESPN class rankings, they sit at number 6. They've still got several players out there that they're targeting that I think that are very good prospects. Like we talked about Bates and DJ Smith out of Georgia, very versatile athlete. Josh Malone, and in-state guys there. So there's still some very good players for them to add to this class. And I think when you look at Butch Jones, what stands out is there's nothing about him that you get a feeling that he's doing from a distance. He's very involved. He's coming with it with a lot of passion. And I think kind of the days, you know, the old expression, there's more than one way to skin a cat, but I think kind of the days of the head coach being the guy who sits back and is the closer at the end, I think those days are kind of gone with the way the recruiting cycle has sped up, with so much more publicity being put on recruiting that head coaches are getting more involved. And I think you better have a lot of energy. You better have a lot of passion. I think when Butch Jones has come in, I think he's kind of shown those type of things where he's kind of jumped in the deep end of the pool. He's all in, and he's going to bring max effort, whether it be in state where Tennessee has struggled. There's a limited talent pool within a state, and so you got to be able to get the best players. And right now they're in a situation to potentially land, according to our rankings, for the top 5 players in a state, which is something Tennessee hasn't done recently. And then also to kind of go out and be able to land talent out of Georgia or Florida and go other places. So I think so far it's hard to say that he's done anything wrong, because he put together a nice class as soon as he came in there in a short amount of time. And then now he's off to a really fast start with this 2014 class, currently with a top 10 class.
Craig, you have Tennessee has 2 of the top ESPN 150 players. We mentioned Jalen Hurt. You talked about him, but also talk about Todd Kelly Jr. from right here in Knoxville.
Yeah, the thing I like about Todd Kelly is, and he's just a football player. He's a very good athlete, I don't mean, but he's one of those guys when he steps on the field, he just seems to be comfortable out there. He's always kind of in the right spot. He's around the football. He'll hit you. He'll do all those little things well. I think he's one of those guys who could potentially be a guy for a Tennessee team. Obviously, these guys still have to go through his senior year and everything, so we're still a year away before they even have an opportunity to make any type of contribution. But I think he's one of those guys who you kind of stick on the football field on special teams, work him into your defense, just because he's just a good football player. He's going to be where he needs to be. He's going to know his assignments, and you add that with good athleticism, and I think that's a huge in-state pickup, because you watch his film, and sometimes he doesn't always jump out at you athletically as maybe some of the other top defensive backs in his class, but the more you watch him, the more tape you watch him, he never goes away. He's always there around the ball making plays.
Todd Kelly Jr. is number 61 in the ESPN 150. Jalen Hurd is number 41. And as Craig mentioned earlier, Tennessee ranked number 6 in the ESPN ranking, 6 4-stars, 4 3-stars, 5 others. Just overall, what else stands out about the 2014 class with those 15 commits to this point, other than the guys you've already mentioned, Craig?
Well, obviously, I think if you look at that 2013 class, it was a little bit more of a mix with some defense, and I think what stands out about this class right now is some really good players, but obviously I think the key for Tennessee, there's a lot of holes to fill, but obviously if you're going to compete in the SEC, you got to get better on defense. You look at this class right now, they have Joe Henderson, I think, who has very nice upside as a pass rusher, but a lot of the players, Travion Polk, Vic Wharton III, who can obviously a Nashville guy who can play on offense or play on defense. I think it's a very good class, a little bit more leaning heavily on offense. I think the key for Tennessee as the recruiting process unfolds is to be able to see what they can continue to do on the defensive side of the ball. And there's still a lot of players. We talked about Dylan Bates earlier. I mentioned DJ Smith, Wesley Green out of MLK High School in Georgia. So there are some opportunities for them out there to bulk the defensive side of the ball in this 2014 class. So obviously with their ranking number 6, doing a great job with some offensive players. And I think the next step for Tennessee to see how they finish is what can they add to this class, particularly on the defensive side of the ball.
Couple of prospects, targets for Tennessee, and there's obviously a lot of them, as you well know. But Adoree Jackson has said that he might come from California and travel over to visit some SEC schools this summer, including Tennessee. How legit do you think that is that Adoree Jackson could end up at an SEC school or even specifically Tennessee?
I think it's legit. Definitely, obviously, the SEC is a conference that has right now is at the top. It's on every, obviously with the national championships, people are always talking about the SEC, so it has a gravitation beyond the Southeast to appeal to players all over the country. So for Adoree Jackson to have some SEC schools and is currently in his top 10 is not shocking. If Tennessee can get him on campus, that's huge. Anytime you can get a prospect on campus, you have a chance. So we'll see what happens. But, I think, though, he's going to probably wind up remaining out west.
And what about quarterbacks? Deshaun Kaiser, David Cornwell, both Tennessee's seems to be in the mix for those guys. Do you think Tennessee is in a good position for either one of those two quarterbacks?
Yes, I do. I think what's going to have to happen, though, and I think we're starting to, Kyle Allen just committing to Texas A&M, I think we're going to start to see kind of the dominoes fall a little bit here. I think the next step is going to see what happens with Alabama, as some of those quarterbacks are also in the mix for the Crimson Tide. And I think once a move is kind of made there, I think you're going to see some more things falling into place. But obviously Tennessee in the mix for those. And David Cornwell, we'll see what happens, but that would be a particularly huge pickup. Interesting player. Obviously he's going through an eligibility issue right now as he out in the state of Oklahoma if he can play his senior year because of missing a year earlier in his high school career. He only has 1 year of varsity football under his belt, but outstanding wealth of tools. So he would be a great pickup for them, but I think they got a legitimate shot at both of those guys, or obviously one or the other. But I think we're a little bit down the road, kind of seeing how some other things fill in first before we find out what happens with Tennessee and their quarterback situation.
Craig, we're starting to lose you a little bit with the cell phone, but we really appreciate your time. You can find Craig on Twitter. It's Craig Haubert. It's CraigHaubert, college football analyst and also recruiting coordinator for ESPN and ESPN's Recruiting Nation. Craig, you do a great job. Really respect your work. Thanks so much for the time today. Have a super weekend.